Grooming gang.
Grooming gang.
The Muslim rape gangs.
In case you didn't know, Tommy Robinson, who rose to fame as leader of the EDL, a far-right street movement in the UK, has gained a lot of popularity and money from talking about grooming gangs.
Muslims are overrepresented in convictions for sexual exploitation of young children. 90% of the convictions for child exploitation in grooming gangs is Muslim men. Muslims make up 4% of the British population.
This is, as you might have guessed, completely untrue. In this little 3-part mini breakdown, I'm going to explain why this is just untrue, and it's going to consist of a section on framing the debate, a section on breaking down the statistics, and one final one on the impact that all this has had on his followers. So, without further ado, let's get started on the video. Part 1. Framing the debate. So, before we get into statistics, we need to talk about how this has all been framed. And to do that, let's momentarily assume that everything Quilliam has reported is true, and that Muslims really are overrepresented in grooming gang statistics, as Tommy Robinson seems to conclude. So, if we are going to examine the claim made by Tommy Robinson's pals, we're going to have to define what a grooming gang is. And here we encounter a little issue, because before 2011, the term didn't actually exist. It was first used in the Times in 2011, but before that, the word grooming gang, the term grooming gang, didn't exist. It's been taken out of tabloid newspapers and put into our everyday language. In the next section of the video, I'll go more into the CEOP definition, because that section is about statistics, but for now, let's just say that grooming gang describes a specific type of group paedophile. All grooming gangs are group paedophiles, but not all group paedophiles are grooming gangs. And again, as I will explain in the statistics video, group paedophiles are a minority of paedophiles, if a particularly disgusting minority, overall. If we were to visualise it, it might look something like this. So, we're assuming that this graph is accurate because you believe Quilliam were, despite appearances, impartial. Well, okay, then I don't suppose you'll mind Asian people taking and using this pie chart, which I created, showing what we know about people who sexually abuse children under 2. It's perfectly accurate. But then, perhaps upon seeing the second graph, you think that breaking down paedophiles to target certain ethnic groups is a bit disingenuous. Well, you should have a big problem with the term grooming gangs in that case. You see, when you bring their ethnicity into it, you play into the hands of the far right. You might not have a racist bone in your body, and I honestly believe you when you say you don't. But if you choose to ignore the language they use and the data they misrepresent, you are helping them further an agenda which distorts the facts for the victims as opposed to actually helping them. For instance, if you are like Tommy Robinson and insist on saying Muslim paedophiles, you have to examine what that does. Let's say that this diagram represents all Muslims and the crossover between Muslims and paedophiles. Now, Tommy Robinson wants you to focus on this bit here. Why? Well, he does this by using grooming gangs as an ultra-specific type of paedophile and zooming in on that, but what this does is drag all of these Muslims here into your definition of what a paedophile is. That's too bad, you might say. If Asian men are there, we have to mention they are Asian, you might argue. Well, okay, but we'd also have to mention that the crossover between white people and paedophiles would look a bit more like this. But you would probably dislike it if Asian people went about sharing that image on Facebook, right? Why should you be associated with paedophiles just because you're white and the majority of paedophiles are white? Can you imagine an Asian Tommy Robinson going around on Facebook saying that, well, most white people are nice and all, but
90% of the convictions for child exploitation
are white British men? I'm guessing you'd feel a little bit attacked, right? Well, that's how Muslims are feeling. They're being told that they are guilty by association because a far-right think tank zoomed in on a minority of paedophiles to highlight their ethnicity. And it's at this point that somebody usually drops into the comments to insist,
"You're defending paedophiles. Do you not care at all about the victims?"
And I have to be clear, I would never defend paedophiles. That's not what I'm doing. They torture children, and that just makes me feel so sick. It actually sickens me. What I am saying is that we should be focusing on all paedophiles irrespective of their ethnicity. That we should not be focusing on this, but instead focusing on this. And yes, I do think that anyone who covers up for these paedophiles, irrespective of anyone's ethnicity or anybody's political position, should be condemned and certainly removed from public office. But Tommy Robinson does not help. He's there to exploit the manipulated statistics for money. If you want to help victims, I would encourage you to go and do that by following the CEOP guidelines on how to help fight paedophiles in our community, which are laid out on page 12 of the 2011 CEOP report and is linked in the description under this video. Notice that it does not say anything there about blaming Muslims or Asians or recommending attending far-right rallies. If you want to genuinely help victims, look at the stuff that's written by people who are experts and genuinely care. Part 2. The Quilliam Conundrum. So, Tommy Robinson here is taking figures from the Quilliam report, which found that 84%, not 90%, of those convicted for grooming gang crimes were Asian men. Asian men, you'll notice, ain't the same as Muslims. That's not the same thing. That's one of the first issues. This is an Asian man. This is also an Asian man. And this is also an Asian man. This is also the man who founded Quilliam. He's a friend of Tommy Robinson's, no less, and a business partner who paid Tommy Robinson to leave the EDL. Fake news, I hear you cry. What liberal lefty snowflake made that claim? Well, guys, that would be the SJW figure, that old SJW known as Tommy Robinson. So, unless Tommy Robinson is lying, then this is already looking pretty corrupt. So, if we're going to examine the claim made by Tommy Robinson's pals, we're going to have to define what a grooming gang is. And here we encounter a little issue, because again, this term didn't exist. First used in the Times in 2011, we've already been over it. So okay, generally what it means is a group of people who sexually exploit children, right? Well no! The authorities on this issue, the CEOP, have two classifications for their group paedophiles, Type 1 and Type 2. The report which Quilliam used to come up with this 84% figure claims that Type 1 offenders are 50% Asian and Type 2 are 100% white men. Which kind of throws a spanner in the works for the claim about 84%, right? So, the Quilliam report gets around this by saying
Type 2 offenders cannot be defined as grooming gangs because there are no grooming tactics involved.
The issue being, of course, that this isn't a claim the CEOP makes. Grooming tactics can be used by either Type 1 or Type 2 group paedophiles, but it was convenient for Quilliam, so they made that claim. It's convenient, isn't it? If there are too many white people in your statistics, just use a definition which eradicates a bunch of them. That's much easier than actually using statistics which show actual things which you might not agree with. Quilliam used their own research, which they refused to release documentation on, and don't actually provide any evidential basis for the range of their data collection, but given who they associate with, it's not hard to guess how they chose what to include in their research. Given how they treated the CEOP data though, we can be fairly certain it was unscientific and based on their anger at the regressive left, which they actually stated in their report, in case you were still under the illusion that Quilliam is impartial. The CEOP also state in their reports that their data on ethnicity is incomplete and should not be used to draw national conclusions, which the Quilliam report actually does. The CEOP say,
"Caution should be taken in drawing conclusions about ethnicity due to the relatively small number of areas where agencies have been proactive around this particular type of crime. We do not draw national conclusions about ethnicity from the data available at this time because it is too inconsistent."
So why did Quilliam not apply the same standards? Well, it wouldn't have made for a good case against the regressive left if they hadn't cherry-picked their statistics to prove what they wanted it to say, would it? But okay, let's suppose you're sat there insisting to yourself that Quilliam is correct and I'm just a regressive leftist trying to defend Muslims blah conspiracy. You believe Quilliam's statistics. You think that this graph is accurate because you believe Quilliam were impartial. Well, from the same CEOP report that Quilliam used, we can see that the CEOP found 2,120 cases of lone paedophiles and 65 cases of group paedophiles across all the police stations they used for the study. This means, if we extrapolate those figures like Quilliam did, that 3% of all paedophile cases are committed in groups. Groups, remember, not grooming gangs. Grooming gangs are an even smaller subcategory of group paedophiles. Let's be generous and assume that half of this 3% were grooming gangs. That would mean 1.5% of paedophile cases were defined as grooming gangs. So when Tommy Robinson says
90% of the convictions for child exploitation in grooming gangs is Muslim men,
he's talking about 90% of less than 1.5% of all paedophiles. In other words, the majority of paedophiles are white, but if you zoom in on a certain type of paedophile, you can make it look like Asian men are overrepresented, or that white men make up all paedophiles. When I explain this to people, a great many say, oh, but their ethnicity is relevant because the majority of the victims were also white. Well, firstly, the CEOP often makes clear that minority ethnic groups are almost certainly underrepresented in statistics of victim data because they face barriers to reporting which white people simply don't. And it's difficult enough for white people themselves to report sexual crimes. But also, when you bring ethnicity into it, again, you're just playing into the hands of the far right. All it's doing is helping the people who want to create hatred against Muslims and not actually helping the victims themselves. So what about these people who want to create a hatred of Muslims? How is this going? Part 3. The impact on the people who follow him. And finally, I wanted to say why this was so important. We are going to read some quotations from the comments on Tommy Robinson's Facebook page. Considering you now know that grooming gangs are just a lens which distorts the picture to allow a focus on Muslims for Robinson, see what you make of this.
They are savages. Cats and dogs don't mix.
Round them and their family up and deport them back to the country of origin, and don't let any more people in from these countries. End of.
Lefty's answer to this problem is it's just a few bad apples committing these terrible crimes. My answer to the problem is cut the apple fucking tree down, no more bad apples.
Just put them in concentration camps and ring British Gas for some services. Lol.
It makes sense, since I suppose all the pedos be called Muhammad after he was King Pedo #1.
Of they are only 4%, kick them out.
These filthy scumbags are just the tip of the iceberg. There's thousands more groomers that have not been caught or exposed yet. It's in their blood and genes paedophilia.
Tick tock, only a matter of time before we join in on the holy war. Fucking hell.
Ku Klux Klan. If nothing was done, if nobody listened, if things didn't change, if they did it themselves, not saying they were right, but when people feel nobody cares and listens, they take the law into their own hands. Governments need to listen before this happens, and people become desperate for change.
Roll on Brexit. Round them all up and chuck them out. You do know that Brexit is like a trade negotiation, not like whatever you think it is. Jesus.
No white girls should have male Muslim friends. If they do, they better make sure they always wear their tea towel on their head or they will be gang raped, period.
People need to wake up! ! It's a matter of time before the UK is taken up by Islam. Full stop. It's already started with that Dick Sadiq Khan, angry face, totally laughing at us. The UK, Union Jack, this is our country. It's time to stop talking and act.
Shame the Third Reich and the SS isn't around. This shit wouldn't be happening and they would have been chucked in gas chambers.
It must be obvious to all by now that the two cultures cannot live side by side, and time for them to go. To hell.
Hopefully vigilante gangs against Islam-Muslim dominance will grow and strike hard.
You can't mix cultures. It doesn't work.
Wake up and smell the coffee, you left-wing wankers! Angry face, angry face, angry face, angry face! Oh, Jesus Christ, these people.
There is the rape culture all the feminists fear, only it's not our culture. Strange how most of them defend this cult as a cult of peace and love. Thinking face, angry face, angry face, angry face.
We need to take the law into our own hands. If the law does nothing, then we must. I mean, they can't arrest everyone if you just collectively start killing all of them. You know, like in a war for the future of your children, because that's what this is, and your side is losing, horribly. Jesus Christ.
And by the way, this isn't an idle threat. They are a tried and tested scapegoating technique, which was even used by Nazi propagandists in the 1930s against Jewish people, which Der Stürmer, a Nazi newspaper, would claim were raping young German Aryan girls. They do it because claiming that their scapegoats are rapists and paedophiles works every single time they try it. And one final set of quotations. These are from Darren Osborne's wife. Darren Osborne was the man who rammed his vehicle into a group of Muslims leaving their mosque in Finsbury Park. He was known to be a Tommy Robinson and Britain First supporter, and his wife has stated,
"In recent weeks, he has become obsessed with Muslims, accusing them all of being rapists and being part of paedophile gangs."
You see, these far-right ideas aren't based in fact. They're self-contradictory, they're horrendous, and I would encourage you not to follow where Tommy Robinson is leading, because he's leading his followers down a very, very dark path, mostly so he can benefit from the money that he makes. I'd like to give special thanks to Jody Sinead, Kevin Logan and Kristi Winters for their help with this video. They are 3 fantastic YouTubers. I would encourage you to go and check out their channels. They produce some awesome stuff. And I will link all of their social media and YouTube in the description below. And until next time, don't watch Tommy Robinson videos, don't follow him on Facebook, on Twitter, whatever else he's on. Just don't do it. I promise you, that guy is not doing you any good.